There are people who cannot scream for help, even if they are hurt, even if they are terrified. Their voice locks shut, trapped by a wiring in the brain that mistakes a stranger's glance for a mortal threat. This is selective mutism, an involuntary silence. And in those frozen moments, survival depends on a slip of paper, a desperate note passed to the wrong person. This is what happens when the only cry for help is written on a diner napkin, and it lands in the hands of a man who traffics in violence. Her name is Laura. For her, a crowded diner is a minefield of social triggers. His name is unspoken, a man known for his brutal reputation, not for reading notes from frightened women. Tonight, these two worlds collide. But here is the urgent question. When a plea for salvation is delivered to the devil himself, does it spell her doom or become her only chance at survival? Laura's silence wasn't born in that diner. It was forged in childhood, a neurological defense mechanism that misinterpreted everyday social interaction as life-threatening danger. Selective mutism, as diagnosed when she was 7, is an anxiety disorder with a genetic blueprint. She likely inherited a head-trigger amygdala, the brain's fear center, from a lineage of anxious relatives. In a typical brain, this region assesses a social moment and gives the all-clear. In Laura's, it sounds a full-body alarm, flooding her system with cortisol and adrenaline, literally paralyzing her vocal cords. This isn't shyness, it's a biological lockdown. By age 28, Laura had built a fragile ecosystem within these limits. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, communicating almost exclusively through email and text. Her apartment was a sanctuary. The outside world was a series of calculated risks. A grocery store self-checkout was manageable. A chatty cashier was not. Ordering coffee through an app was routine. Correcting a mistaken order in person was impossible. Her life was a map of safe routes and no-go zones, drawn and redrawn every single day. The diner, Frankie's Grill, was supposed to be on the safe list. It was Tuesday night, half empty, her usual booth in the back by the window. She came here for the predictable noise, the impersonal clatter of plates that required nothing from her. She would order the soup and sandwich combo by pointing to the menu, smile at the waitress, and pay with exact cash to avoid conversation. For 3 years, this had worked. It was one of the few public places where she didn't feel the constant, squeezing pressure in her chest. That pressure had been building for weeks from a different, more tangible source. His name was Darren Vicks. He was her landlord's son, a man who saw a quiet, solitary woman as an easy mark. It began with maintenance visits that lingered too long, with comments about her being all alone. Then came the texts, first about rent, then increasingly personal. When she blocked his number, the notes appeared under her door. The final one, slipped through the mail slot that morning, was not a note. It was a photograph of her, taken through her own living room window, with a time written on it, tonight, 10 p.m. The message was clear, her sanctuary had been breached. The map of her world was shrinking to zero. Laura knew the statistics. Women with communication disorders are significantly more likely to be targeted for violence and less likely to report it. Her silence wasn't just a social barrier, it was a predator's invitation. Calling the police was a psychological impossibility. The thought of trying to speak to a dispatcher, to articulate the terror through a frozen throat, triggered a panic so severe it felt like suffocation. Her family was distant, geographically and emotionally, having long ago dismissed her condition as a phase or lack of effort. She was, as the clinical literature coldly states, a highly vulnerable individual with inadequate support systems. Oh, she went to the only place that still felt marginally safe, Frankie's Grill. She sat in her booth, her hands shaking under the table, clutching a pen. On a clean paper napkin, in block letters blurred by her tears, she wrote the only truth that mattered. He is coming to my apartment at 10. I'm not safe, please help me. Her plan was desperate and simple. She would slide it to Mo, the night manager, a burly, kind man in his 60s who sometimes gave her a free slice of pie. He would understand. He would call the police for her. It was a lifeline thrown across a chasm of silence. But here is where the fragile architecture of her plan met the brutal reality of chance. At exactly 7:45, Mo was called to the kitchen for a delivery dispute. The booth behind Laura, always empty on Tuesdays, was now occupied. A group of 4 men had arrived 10 minutes prior. They weren't loud, but they carried a gravity that changed the air in the room. Waitresses gave them a wide berth. The cook personally brought their coffees. At the head of the booth, his back to Laura, was a man in a dark navy suit. This was Alessio the Ghost Marino. While Laura's world was built on silence born of fear, Alessio's was built on silence born of power. In his world, words were liabilities, reputation was everything. At 36, he controlled a significant portion of the city's portside logistics, a euphemism for a network of influence that moved goods and settled disputes with quiet, brutal efficiency. He was called the Ghost not because he was unseen, but because problems had a way of disappearing before they ever reached him. He was a man insulated by layers of command, a CEO of shadows. His presence in a mid-tier diner was an anomaly, a neutral territory meeting to discuss a territorial dispute that hadn't yet escalated to violence. His second-in-command, a man named Saul, was talking in low tones about a shipment. Alessio listened, his eyes scanning the diner's reflection in the dark window, a habit of constant assessment. He saw the woman in the booth behind him in the glass. He registered the tense set of her shoulders, the way she stared at a napkin as if it held a verdict. He noted it as one notes a weather change, data, not drama. His concern was the deal, the balance of power, the millions of dollars in cargo floating offshore. Laura, deafened by her own panic, saw Mo exit the kitchen and head toward the storage closet. This was her chance. Without looking, her hand snaked out from her booth. She folded the napkin once and slid it across the polished laminate, aiming for the edge of Mo's usual pathway, but her calculation was off by 6 inches. The napkin, gliding silently, passed the aisle and came to rest against a polished black leather shoe under the next booth. Saul stopped talking. All 4 men looked down. The diner's ambient noise, the hiss of the grill, the clink of cutlery seemed to vanish. Alessio Marino slowly leaned down and picked up the napkin. He unfolded it with deliberate, quiet motions. His eyes moved across the 7 words. His expression, always under tight control, did not change, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His nostrils flared. He read it again. Then, with a calm that was more terrifying than any outburst, he turned and looked over the back of the booth, directly into the red-rimmed, terrified eyes of Laura. He held her gaze, he held the napkin. In that endless second, 2 utterly alien worlds, one of paralyzing fear, one of absolute power, crashed together. The plea for salvation had been delivered, but to the wrong God. And now, the only sound was the pounding of a terrified heart and the silent, unreadable judgment in a mafia boss's eyes. What happens next defies every expectation. Because the most dangerous man in the room had just read a cry for help from the most vulnerable, and in that message, he didn't see a problem. He saw something else entirely, a reflection. Alessio Marino did not see a victim. In those 7 words scribbled in panic, he saw a ghost from his own past. And in that moment, a man who solved problems through calculated violence made a decision that defied his entire world's logic. He did not speak to her. Instead, he held up one finger to Saul, a silent command that froze his men. Then, with the same deliberate calm, he pocketed the napkin. He said 2 words to his table, so low only they could hear, "Wait outside." Without another glance at Laura, his 3 associates stood and filed out of the diner. The air they left behind was charged, electric with uncertainty. Laura felt her body lock completely. This was the freeze response in its most absolute form. Her muscles refused to obey any command to flee. Her breath came in shallow, silent hitches. She was a witness to her own impending disaster. Alessio waited a full minute after the door closed behind his men. He took a final sip of his coffee, placed a $100 bill on the table, and stood. He did not approach her directly. He walked to the counter, spoke quietly to the waitress, and pointed toward the back hall. The waitress nodded, her eyes wide, and scurried away. Alessio then turned, and for the second time, his gaze landed on Laura. This time, he walked toward her. He did not ask if he could sit. He simply slid into the booth opposite her, his large frame making the space feel suddenly, dangerously small. He placed the napkin, now smoothed flat, on the table between them. He studied her face, the tear tracks, the wide, terrified eyes, the way her hands were clenched white on her lap. He saw the truth before she could ever explain it. "You can't speak," he stated, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question. Laura managed the smallest nod, her eyes darting to the napkin, then to the door. To anyone, or just to me? He asked, his head tilting slightly. She hesitated, then shook her head. Not just to him, to everyone in this situation. Alessio leaned back, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his features. He understood power, he understood fear, he understood the currency of silence, but this was different. This was a cage, and he had seen a cage like this before. Your name is Laura, he said, reading the name signed with a shaky L at the bottom of the note. This man, the one coming at 10, who is he? Laura's mind screamed, but her throat remained sealed. She fumbled in her bag, her hands trembling violently, and pulled out her phone. With frantic fingers, she opened her photo gallery, scrolled past countless design mock-ups and reference images, and found it. The photo Darren had sent. She turned the screen to Alessio. He took the phone. His eyes scanned the image, the invasion of privacy, the implied threat. He zoomed in on the scrawled time. Your landlord's son, he deduced, connecting the earlier notes she had saved in a folder. His jaw tightened again, that same barely perceptible tell. When he looked back at her, his eyes were different. The cold assessment was gone, replaced by a chilling, focused clarity. He thinks your silence makes you weak, Alessio said, almost to himself. He thinks no one is listening for your scream. He slid the phone back to her. He is wrong. This was the pivot, the revelation. Alessio, the ghost, Marino, was not reacting with predatory interest. He was reacting with recognition. Years earlier, his younger sister Gia had been stalked by an ex-boyfriend. The police had been useless, citing lack of evidence and domestic disputes. Gia, loud and fiery, had screamed for help to anyone who would listen. No one did. Until one night, the ex-boyfriend broke in. Alessio had arrived too late to prevent the attack, but not too late to deliver a permanent solution. His sister survived, but her light was dimmed forever. The system had failed her because her voice, though loud, was not deemed credible enough. In Laura, he saw the inverse, a voice so silenced the system would never even hear it in the first place. Her note wasn't a plea to him, it was a plea to the void, and he had intercepted it. This is what will happen, Alessio said, his voice leaving no room for argument. You will go home, you will act normal, you will be there at 10 o'clock. My men and I will be there too. You will not see us, but he will. Laura shook her head violently, fresh tears spilling. The idea of willingly being in that apartment, of being bait, was unthinkable. Alessio understood her fear. You are already trapped. This is the only way out where you remain safe, and he never bothers you again. The police will not help you. I will. He leaned forward, his intensity palpable. Your silence is not a weakness here. It is an advantage. He expects a frightened woman who cannot call for help. He will not be looking for me. He took a pen from his jacket. On a clean diner napkin, he wrote a phone number. This is a burner. Text this number when you are inside your apartment. Then go about your routine. Do not look for us. We will handle the rest. The surrealism of the moment was absolute. A mafia boss was orchestrating a protective detail. Laura, whose life was built on avoiding any and all conflict, was being drafted into a tactical operation. Her choice was no choice at all. Face Darren alone, or accept help from the most dangerous man in the city. Her hand trembled as she took the napkin with the number. Alessio stood up. Text the address now, then go home. He walked away, leaving her sitting in the booth, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of the diner, holding a napkin that felt like both a lifeline and a pact with the devil. Somehow her body moved on autopilot. She texted the address to the number. She paid her bill with shaking hands. She walked out into the cool night air. The drive home was a blur. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage set for a play she never auditioned for. Every shadow seemed to hold one of Alessio's men. Every creak of the building made her jump. At 9:45, a text arrived on the burner phone from an unknown number. Lights on, TV sound, be in the living room, do not lock the deadbolt. The instructions were terrifyingly specific. She followed them, sitting on her couch, pretending to watch a sitcom she couldn't comprehend. At 9:58, she heard the distinct click of her apartment doors lock being quietly picked. The handle turned. Darren Vicks stepped inside, a smug, predatory smile on his face. See, I told you I'd come, he said, pushing the door shut behind him. Laura froze just as she had in the diner, but this freeze was different. It was expected. It was part of the script. Darren took 2 steps into the room, all alone, just how you like it, right? So quiet. He took another step. Then, from the dark hallway that led to her bedroom, a figure emerged, not one of Alessio's soldiers, Alessio himself. He moved with a silence that made Laura's conditions seem loud by comparison. He was a shadow given form. Darren spun around, his smile vanishing. "Who the hell are you?" Alessio didn't answer. He simply looked at Darren, a look that conveyed volumes of violent intent without a single word. "This is private," Darren blustered, recovering slightly. "I'm her landlord. Get out before I call the cops." "You should call them," Alessio said, his voice flat. "Tell them you broke into a woman's apartment after sending her threatening photographs. Tell them you're here uninvited at 10 o'clock at night. I will wait." Darren's bravado cracked. He looked from Alessio's impassive face to Laura's terrified form on the couch. He was a bully who preyed on perceived weakness, and he was suddenly facing a force of nature he couldn't comprehend. "She's crazy. She invited me. She's got problems." "I know she has problems," Alessio said, taking a slow step forward. "You are not one of them anymore. You will leave this building tonight. You will sign over your father's management interest in this property to a holding company my lawyer will name. You will move to another state, and you will never look in this woman's direction again. If you do, I will not issue a warning. I will not send a note. Do you understand the difference?" Darren understood. The color drained from his face. He nodded, a quick, jerky motion. "Good," Alessio said. He gestured toward the door. "My associates outside will escort you to your father's house now to begin the paperwork. Go." Darren fled. The door closed behind him. And just like that, the imminent threat that had defined Laura's existence for weeks was gone, neutralized not by the law, but by a more primal form of justice. Laura sat, still frozen, but now for a different reason. The shock of the resolution was as profound as the terror of the threat. Alessio looked at her. He didn't offer empty comfort. He simply said, "The deadbolt will be fixed. The building will be sold to a new owner. Your rent will not increase. He will not return." He turned to leave. A sound escaped Laura's throat. It wasn't a word. It was a strained, choked gasp of air. Alessio paused, looking back. She picked up her phone, her fingers finally steadying. She typed with frantic speed and turned the screen to him. The message read, "Why?" Alessio read it. For the first time, his armor seemed to thin, because the world is full of men like him who only understand one language, and I am fluent in it. He paused, his eyes lingering on her design portfolio open on the coffee table. "And because your note did not say, 'Call the police,' it said, 'Please help me,' there is a difference." He left then, melting back into the shadows of her hallway, leaving her alone in the sudden, profound quiet of her secure apartment. The crisis was over, but something else had begun. Laura had just witnessed the terrifying efficacy of a power she could never comprehend, wielded inexplicably in her defense. She was safe, but now indebted to a ghost. And as she sat there in the silence, she realized the most unsettling truth of all. For the first time in her adult life, someone had listened. Not to her voice, but to her silence, and they had answered. But this answer came with a price. A man like Alessio Marino did not engage in charitable work. He had settled a problem, yes, but he had also identified a resource. A woman who couldn't speak, who observed everything, who lived in the shadows. In his world, such a person was not a victim. She was an asset. And as Laura stared at the door, a new fear began to take root, colder and more complex than the fear of Darren. What does a mafia boss do with an asset he has just saved? The protection might be over, but the entanglement was just beginning. And the next note might not be from her asking for help. It might be from him asking for a favor. For 2 weeks, Laura experienced a peace so profound it felt alien. The building was sold to a discreet property management company. Darren vanished. But in the economy of the underworld, a debt is never forgiven. It is merely called due at a time of the creditor's choosing. The call came not to the burner phone, which had gone silent, but to her personal cell, a blocked number. When she answered, there was only the sound of breathing for 3 seconds, then a hang-up. An hour later, a black sedan pulled up outside her design studio downtown. Saul, Alessio's second, stepped out. He didn't enter. He simply placed a small, elegant gift box on the doorstep, rang the bell, and left. Inside the box was not a threat, but a key to a private post office box downtown. There was no note. The message was clear, the line of communication was open, and it was her turn to walk to it. The power dynamic had just reasserted itself. Her safety had been a transaction, and now the invoice had arrived. Trembling, Laura went to the post office box the next day. Inside was a single sheet of high-quality stationery. The request, typed, was simple: a man named Leo Peretti dines at Giovanni's Ristorante every Thursday at 8 p.m. at table 14. He always pays with a specific black credit card. Take the table behind him this Thursday. Observe. After he leaves, text the last 4 digits of the card he uses to the original number. That is all. It was not a violent request. It was not even explicitly illegal. It was a test. Could she follow instructions? Could she be a set of eyes? Her muteness, which had been her vulnerability, was now being assessed as a potential operational asset. No risk of drunken conversation, no chance of a verbal slip. She was a camera with a conscience, and she had to decide if her conscience was a luxury she could still afford. She went to Giovanni's that Thursday. She sat at table 13, her back to Leo Peretti, a florid man in his 50s conducting a loud business dinner. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her exterior, honed by a lifetime of stillness, was calm. She watched the reflection in the polished dessert spoon. She saw him hand the black card to the waiter. She memorized the last 4 digits as the waiter walked away. She left before the check was returned. In the alley behind the restaurant, she texted the numbers. The reply was immediate: "Thank you." This was the new normal. For a month, she received similar tasks: observe a warehouse gate and note the license plate of the 3rd truck to arrive. Sketch the interior layout of a specific upscale bar from a corner seat. Each task was a puzzle piece, and she was deliberately kept from seeing the whole picture. She was a sensor in Alessio's network, and the work was chillingly easy for her. Her condition made her the perfect, unobtrusive observer. The fear of being caught was now layered with a more complex dread. She was becoming useful. Then the nature of the tasks changed. The next note in the P.O. box contained a photograph of a woman in her 40s with gentle eyes and a shy smile. Annette Riggs, the note read. She works at the Mid-City Public Library. She is being pressured by a loan shark named Milo. She is too afraid to go to the police. Be a friend. Let her talk. Report the details of her situation. This was different. This was using Laura's perceived harmlessness, her empathetic silence, as a tool for intelligence gathering. Alessio wasn't just using her eyes, he was using her very nature as a lure for confidences. The moral line blurred. Was she helping another victim, or was she setting up a target for Alessio's brand of justice? Laura went to the library. She approached Annette at the reference desk with a note explaining she was researching selective mutism for a design project about communication. Annette's eyes softened with immediate understanding. They began to meet weekly for coffee. Annette, isolated and terrified, began to share her son's medical bills, the escalating threats from Milo, the envelope of cash left in her car that she was too scared to spend or report. Laura listened, her silence a vessel for Annette's fear. She relayed the details, cold and clinical, to the burner number. She felt like a traitor. A week later, Annette arrived at coffee beaming. "It's over," she whispered. "Milo came to my house last night. He apologized. He said the debt was forgiven." He looked terrified. Annette grasped Laura's hand. Sometimes miracles happen. Laura knew the cost of that miracle. She had been the instrument of it. The debt had not been forgiven, it had been transferred to Alessio, and by extension to her. The weight of her complicity settled in her stomach like a stone. The final escalation came on a rainy Tuesday. The note in the box was not a request. It was a summons, an address, a time, and 2 words: important meeting. The address was a nondescript office building in the financial district. The office suite on the 12th floor was empty except for a conference table, 2 chairs, and Alessio Marino. He stood at the window, looking out at the gray city. He turned as she entered. He looked tired, the power in him banked to a quieter, more dangerous ember. "Thank you for coming," he said. He gestured to a chair. "The work you have done has been valuable, precise." Laura sat, placing her notepad and pen on the table, her voice. "I have a proposition," Alessio continued, sitting opposite her. a formal arrangement. You have a unique skill set. In my world, reliable information is the only currency that matters. You can gather it without raising a single alarm. I am offering you a retainer, a significant one. In return, you would be available for occasional observational work. No violence, no direct involvement, just watching and reporting. He slid a contract across the table. It was from a shell corporation called Silent Witness Consultancy. The annual retainer was a number that made her vision blur. It was more than 5 years of her design income. It was freedom from financial worry, a safety net made of the very danger she feared. But here was the trap, elegantly laid. To refuse was to become a liability, a civilian with knowledge of his operations. To accept was to become a formal asset, a paid employee of the shadow world. It was no longer about repaying a debt. It was about signing a new one. She picked up her pen, she wrote on her pad, "And if I say no?" Alessio read it, he didn't smile. "Then you walk away. The protection on your apartment remains, your silence I trust, but the retainer and its benefits would, of course, be withdrawn." It was a polite fiction. They both knew walking away was impossible. The knowledge she already possessed was a prison. The only way out was deeper in. She wrote another question, her hand steady for the first time. "Why me? You have professionals." Alessio leaned back. "Professionals have agendas, egos, they talk to impress. They interpret when they should only observe. You," he gestured to her notepad, "you report exactly what you see, you don't filter, you don't embellish. In my business, the unvarnished truth is rarest thing of all, and you, Laura, are a truth machine." It was the greatest compliment and the most damning indictment of her life. Her condition, her curse, was being recast as a premium service. Before she could respond, the door to the office suite opened. Saul entered, his face grim. He didn't acknowledge Laura. He leaned down and whispered in Alessio's ear. Alessio's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. He stood. "We will have to continue this another time. Saul will see you out through the service elevator." Laura gathered her things, confusion and fear rising. As she followed Saul out, she caught a fragment of Alessio's low, furious voice on his phone. "How did they get that? Which wire? Find it. Now." In the service elevator, Saul was tense, his hand hovering near his jacket. When the doors opened into the underground garage, he didn't lead her to the street. Instead, he guided her quickly to a different car, a common gray sedan. "Get in. Don't go straight home," he instructed, his voice tight. "Something's blown up. You're not involved, but be careful." He drove her to a busy shopping district and dropped her off without another word. Laura stood on the curb, the contract still in her bag, the world suddenly tilting again. She didn't go home. She went to a crowded coffee shop and opened her laptop, her designer's mind now tuned to threat assessment. She ran a discreet news search for Alessio Marino, for his known businesses. Nothing. Then she searched for federal investigation and port authority. On page 3 of the results, a local business blog had a tiny, unremarkable update. Rumors of a major racketeering probe into several logistics firms with port contracts. Sources say investigation may involve sophisticated electronic surveillance. The wire, that was the blow-up. The feds were listening, and if they were listening to Alessio, they might have heard everything, including his meetings, including his recruitment of a mute graphic designer. A new, more profound terror seized her. She wasn't just caught between a mob boss and her conscience. She was now potentially in the crosshairs of a federal racketeering investigation. Her apartment, her safe haven, could be under surveillance. Her digital life could be being pulled apart by forensic accountants. Her consultancy contract was a roadmap to her own indictment. She closed her laptop, her hands ice cold. The offer of a retainer was now a snare. Alessio's world was cracking, and the fissures were reaching her doorstep. She had to decide, and quickly, whether to dive deeper into his sinking ship for protection or to try to swim for a shore guarded by federal agents who would see her not as a victim, but as a cooperating witness or a co-conspirator. That night, as she lay awake staring at her ceiling, a new envelope was slipped under her door. No P.O. box this time, direct delivery. Inside was a single keycard for a luxury hotel downtown, a room number and a time, noon tomorrow, no other instructions. It was a summons to the eye of the storm. Alessio was moving off his standard grid. The system was compromised. The rules were changing. And Laura, the silent woman in the diner, now held secrets that could bring down a criminal empire or send her to prison for decades. The meeting at the hotel would decide her fate. But as she held the keycard, she realized she had one power left, one final, desperate form of communication she had never considered. She could walk into that hotel room and remain silent, or she could walk into an FBI field office and try to speak. Both choices led into the abyss. The only question was which monster awaited her there. Laura walked into the hotel lobby at 11:58, the keycard burning a hole in her pocket. She expected a final ultimatum, a signed contract, or a threat. What she walked into was the endgame of a war she never knew was being waged. The hotel was a monument of glass and steel, a place for anonymous transactions. Room 1212 was a suite. She slid the keycard. The door unlocked with a soft click. She pushed it open. The room was not occupied by Alessio Marino. It was occupied by two men in cheap suits, their postures screaming federal agent. A third man, younger, was clicking closed a briefcase containing electronic equipment. The curtains were drawn. On the coffee table, a digital recorder sat between two empty coffee cups. Laura, the older agent said, standing, "My name is Special Agent Harper. This is Agent Vance. We need you to remain calm and listen very carefully." Her body locked. The freeze response was total. This was the other monster, and it had found her first. Harper continued, his voice practiced calm. "We know about your contact with Alessio Marino. We know about the diner, the P.O. box, the tasks. We have been monitoring his communications for 8 months. We have a wire on his primary lieutenant, Salvatore Rossi. We heard everything." Laura's mind raced. The blown Operation Sal had mentioned they had been listening. "We do not believe you are a willing participant," Agent Vance said, his tone softer. "We believe you were coerced through a debt of protection. We have the evidence from the Darren Vicks incident. We know you are a victim here, but the law does not see shades of gray. On paper, you are an unindicted co-conspirator in an ongoing racketeering investigation." Harper leaned forward. "We can change that paper. We are offering you a way out, full immunity, in exchange for your testimony and your continued cooperation." Laura found her notepad with shaking hands. She wrote, "Cooperation how?" "You go to your meeting with Marino. You wear a wire. You get him to explicitly state his intentions regarding the contract, to acknowledge the tasks he set for you. We need his voice on tape admitting to the use of a civilian for intelligence gathering. That is the final piece we need for the RICO indictment." They slid a contract across the table, not from Silent Witness Consultancy, from the United States Department of Justice, an immunity agreement. The choice was now crystalline and horrifying. Betray the devil who saved her to the very system that had failed to protect her from Darren. Become a witness, protected by the state, but marked forever as someone who wore a wire against the mob. She wrote, "What happens to him? He goes to prison for a minimum of 25 years. His organization is dismantled. You walk away free and clear with a new identity if you want it." She thought of Annette Riggs, beaming because her nightmare was over. She thought of the chilling efficiency with which Alessio had solved a problem the law had ignored. Then she thought of the cold calculation in his offer, the way he saw her silence as a tool. She picked up the pen, and then she put it down. She shook her head. The agents were stunned. "Laura, this is not a choice. This is your only path to freedom," Harper said, his calm fracturing. She wrote her letters firm. "I want to speak to him, alone, without a wire. Then I will decide." They argued, they threatened, they cited statutes, but Laura held her ground with a quiet, immovable force they had not anticipated. Her muteness, her ultimate defense, became her bargaining chip. They could not force her to speak on a wire. They needed a willing witness. Finally, after a tense 20 minutes, they relented. They would allow a meeting in this room, monitored only by a hidden camera in the smoke detector. No audio. She would have 15 minutes. Alessio arrived at 12:25. He entered alone, his eyes taking in the room, the absence of his men, the presence of Laura sitting rigid on the couch. He did not look surprised. He looked resigned. He sat in the armchair opposite her. "They are listening," he asked quietly, glancing at the ceiling. Laura nodded. He sighed, a sound of genuine fatigue. "I am sorry you were dragged into this." She wrote on her pad, "You knew about the investigation." "For weeks, the wire was on Sal. I discovered it yesterday. That is why I called this meeting, to tell you the deal is off. The contract is void. You are free." This was the surprise, not a final recruitment, but a severance. Laura stared at him, confused. He continued, his voice low. "My world is ending, Laura. It was always going to end this way. I did not want it to end for you too. The retainer was a way to keep you close, to control the variable, but it was also wrong. I saw my sister in you, a woman the system failed. I could not fail you too, then sell you a new cage." He reached into his jacket. The agents watching likely tensed, but he pulled out the silent witness consultancy contract. He also produced a small, elegant lighter. He flicked it alive and touched the flame to the corner of the contract. He held it as it burned, dropping the last smoldering piece into a glass ashtray. "The debt is paid," he said. "The original one, you owe me nothing. When they come for me, you tell them you were coerced. You tell them you were afraid. It is the truth." Laura felt a surge of emotions she couldn't name. Grief, gratitude, terror. She wrote, "Why did you help me that first night? Really?" Alessio was silent for a long moment, because the note was not a strategy, it was not a negotiation, it was a raw human truth. "I am not safe. In my world, I am surrounded by lies, by layers of manipulation." That note was the first true thing I had seen in a long time, and truth is worth protecting, even for a man like me. He stood up. "The agents will be here soon. I will not resist. Tell them I threatened you. It will make your immunity easier." He walked to the door. He paused, his back to her. "Your silence is not a weakness, Laura. It is a fortress. Do not let anyone, not them and certainly not me, convince you to open the gates." Then he was gone. 90 seconds later, the hotel door burst open. Agents Harper and Vance rushed in, followed by a SWAT team. Alessio Marino was apprehended calmly in the hallway, offering no resistance. The takedown was quiet, efficient, and total. Laura gave her statement. She cooperated. She told the truth. She was afraid. She was coerced. She performed minor tasks under duress. The burned contract was entered as evidence of her rejected recruitment. Her immunity was granted. The trial of Alessio, the Ghost, Marino, was the largest organized crime prosecution in a decade. He was convicted on all RICO counts and sentenced to 30 years in a supermax prison. He never testified. He never mentioned Laura. Her name was kept out of the proceedings entirely, a confidential source. The fallout was immense. His empire crumbled, dozens were arrested, and Laura was free. But this is where the documentary finds its final, surprising detail. Freedom is not an end. It is a beginning. With her immunity secured and a modest relocation allowance, Laura did not vanish into a new identity. She did something else. She used her design skills and her profound understanding of silent communication to found a nonprofit. She called it the Unspoken Trust. It provides secure, nonverbal reporting systems for victims of stalking, harassment, and domestic violence who, due to trauma, disability, or fear, cannot use traditional hotlines. The system uses encrypted text, image-based reporting, and a network of advocates who intervene, using the law, not vigilante justice. She never spoke publicly about Alessio Marino, but in the Foundation's confidential intake system, there is a unique, unadvertised protocol code named Ghost Protocol. It is for cases where the legal system has demonstrably failed, where the threat is imminent, and where unconventional channels are the only option. The details of its operation are known only to her. 1 year after the trial, Laura received a letter forwarded through her lawyer. It had no return address. The handwriting was precise, familiar. It contained a single sentence: "The fortress stands." Enclosed was a cashier's check for $250,000 made out to the Unspoken Trust. The donor field was blank. Laura deposited the check. The funds built 3 new secure shelters. She never verified the source. She didn't need to. The woman who could not scream for help had built an institution that listens for silence. The victim became a protector. The asset became a beacon. And the plea on a napkin, which once traveled to the wrong table, ultimately found its way to a purpose no one could have ever predicted. The system had failed her, a criminal had saved her, and she, in the end, chose to build something new in the wreckage of them both. Her story closes not with a verdict in a courtroom, but with a quiet revolution born from a single, desperate sentence: "I am not safe." It became a declaration, and then it became a mission. Laura's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, salvation arrives in forms we've been taught to fear. And sometimes, the system designed to protect us is the very architecture of our vulnerability. Selective mutism, once seen as a rare personal struggle, is a lens through which we can examine a much larger failure. It asks us, who gets to be heard? Whose cry for help is deemed credible? Laura's journey from a silent victim to the founder of the Unspoken Trust is more than an incredible personal triumph. It is a blueprint for reimagining safety itself. She did not find her voice in the traditional sense. Instead, she engineered a new way for silence to speak, and for that speech to be met with action. The legacy of that night in the diner is not a simple parable of good versus evil. It is a complex map of human motivation. Alessio Marino, a man capable of great violence, was also capable of a profound, flawed protection. The federal agents, bound by procedure, initially saw Laura not as a person, but as a piece of evidence. The story lives in the gray space between these black and white poles, reminding us that heroes and villains are categories we invent to make the world less frightening. The Unspoken Trust now operates in over a dozen cities. It has intervened in hundreds of cases where traditional systems failed. It is proof that innovation in justice does not always come from the top down. Sometimes it is built by those who have fallen through the cracks, who understand the shape of the void from the inside. So what remains of that original, desperate note? It exists now as a symbol, a reminder that communication is not just about sound, it is about being received. That being seen is the first, most powerful step toward being saved. Laura's fortress of silence, once her prison, is now a sanctuary she holds open for others. Her story ends with a question for all of us. In a world filled with noise, who are you listening for? And more importantly, how are you listening? Because sometimes the most important messages are not shouted. They are written on napkins, sent in silence, and waiting for someone brave enough to read them. If this story changed your perspective on vulnerability, power, or the unexpected ways we find each other, let us know in the comments. Share your thoughts on the systems that succeed and fail in your own community. And if you want to dive deeper into stories that challenge the simple narratives, make sure to subscribe. We are just getting started.